All right, y'all, you're Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I will be joined by Scott Bair of AtlantaFalcons.com and Jeff Schultz of The Athletic to get their expectations for the Falcons heading into this 2022 season and what exactly a successful year would look like for this team.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. Drew, aka your very humble host of this Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And today's episode is brought to you by Brightco Jewelry and Watch Insurance. Brightco brings you comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for as low as $5 a month. Check out our special offer for Locked On listeners and get covered in under 2 minutes at bright.co/locked on. That's bright.co/locked on. And guys, I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms Monday through Friday, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, hit that bell, give us a like, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So today's episode, I will be joined by two guests, Scott Bair of AtlantaFalcons.com and Jeff Schultz of The Athletic, who covers all of Atlanta sports. And they will be basically sharing with me and you guys their sentiments on sort of what to expect from this Falcon team, and what would sort of indicate a successful 2022 season for the Falcons. And later in the episode, we'll get you guys caught up on the latest news, the practice squad edition there, as well as Drew Dalman being named the starting center. And we'll talk about what that means. But before we get into that conversation, first with Scott and then followed by Jeff, I do want to share with you sort of my expectations and what I think a successful season for the Falcons would be. And it kind of echoes many of the sentiments that Scott and Jeff will share later in this episode, that, I don't think it's necessarily about wins, although that's easy kind of to say, as I do not expect the team to win a lot of games. As I mentioned, I believe on Tuesday's episode when I gave my season preview and predicted a 5-12 finish for the Falcons this year. And so that's easy to say, oh, it's not about wins when you don't expect the team to win. But obviously, the more games they win, the better, at least for this organization. I know some of you guys that are pro tanking don't see it that way. But I think this is an evaluation year. I've said that many times over the last several months. I think this year is about checking boxes. And, given that I do see the Falcons being, at the beginnings of their rebuild, it's really about finding out how many, boxes that they can check, how many young foundational pieces that they have. And those will be some of the sentiments that Jeff and Scott will echo a little bit later on today's episode. So without further ado, let's jump into that conversation first with Scott Bair of Atlanta Falcons.com. All right, y'all, you're Locked On Falcons, and I am joined by an illustrious guest making his debut here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. I have the managing digital editor over at AtlantaFalcons.com in Scott Bair. Scott, my friend, welcome to Locked On Falcons.
It's been a full season, Aaron, and I hadn't been on yet. I was starting to take it personally. So I'm very glad that I'm finally able to join the show. This is a podcast that I listen to. This is a social media account that I follow. So I'm definitely excited to get on and talk some Falcons with you.
Well, I have no excuse for not having you on last year. So, we'll use this as a sign that, brighter things are to come for this podcast, yourself, and of course, the Atlanta Falcons. And that's where we'll kick things off. Get curious to see what your sort of expectations are for this team heading into 2022.
Yeah, it's something that involves the eye test more than like an exact win total. And I think more than anything else, I want to see improvement from this group. And I want to see that Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot's vision is starting to be implemented, right? Last year, they were using so much of the previous regime's players. Now we're seeing a lot more guys that are scheme and system fits. And I think that they're starting to develop their own identity of being a really physical, tough, we don't care what you think type of football team. How many wins that translates to, I'm not really quite sure, but you just want to see steady improvement. You want to see more explosive offense. You want to see the type of defense that Dean Pease likes to implement, which is getting after the passer, both with exotic blitzes and with just a four-man rush. We need to see more turnovers and better scoring defense. So there are lots of little categories outside of wins and losses where I think that we can identify if this franchise and this organization is heading in the right direction.
Well, you said they don't care what you think. That definitely comes through with Arthur Smith in his press conferences when it comes to outside thoughts. So, I'm looking forward to seeing if the team can sort of embody that 0 Fs, I guess, attitude that Arthur Smith exudes when he's talking to the media. I'm curious, Scott, from your perspective, is there sort of one question that sort of rises above the rest that you look at for this football team as sort of an unanswered question that you're hoping to find an answer by the end of the season?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what is probably the most obvious one, right? Is Matt Ryan's successor as a long-term quarterback, is he on this roster? Is he not on this roster? Is it Marcus Mariota, who is only 28 years old, a freak athlete, and a former number 2 overall draft pick? Can he figure it out to the point that you want to entrust him with this franchise for the next 6 years or so, right? That's a possibility. Or, which is a topic that Arthur Smith hilariously discussed on Monday, is at some point, do you need to see Desmond Ridder play in a series of football games to identify if he is a long-term answer as they move towards the 2023 draft, right? We're in the state of Georgia. We know that Jalen Carter's pretty good, right? And he might be available in that upper area. Do you have to go quarterback high? Can you go in another direction? I think that's my biggest question. That's one. Two is it's all about quarterback, right? Can the quarterback play? Can you affect the quarterback? They have 4 edge rushers, all under the age of 26. Lorenzo Carter, D'Angelo Malone, Arnold Ebiketie, Ade Ogundeji. Can they affect the quarterback? So it's all about quarterback play, as we all know, in one way or the other. We need to see if the Falcons have the pieces on the roster to accomplish both of those aims on offense and defense.
So my last question for you, Scott, is asking about what a successful 2022 season looks like for this Falcons team. And is it answering those questions? Is it finding out that they have a quarterback? Is it finding out that they have the beginnings of a formidable pass rush? What does a successful 2022 look like for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think ultimately it comes down to how the team performs in certain kind of statistical categories, right? Are they a good red zone team? Are they a good third down defense? And I think more importantly is how are they going to fare in 1-score games, right? Last year, we saw them be very impactful, 6-2 in 1-score games. We saw them lose a bunch of games by an average of 18 points, right? But you always hear that performance in close games doesn't translate from one year to the other, right? But is Arthur Smith setting up a winning clutch 4th quarter mentality? I think that's how things can translate. If you have guys who have confidence playing well in the 4th quarter, doing well under pressure. So I think that those are, and really doing well under pressure is kind of a theme of everything that we talked about, right? Red zone defense, performing under pressure. I'm sorry, red zone offense, third down defense is performing under pressure, and 4th quarter performance is performing under pressure. So how do they do in those key moments? I think is going to tell me a lot about the mentality of this team. And I think if they do well in those categories, they're going to win more games than people expect. And those who have taken the over on 4.5 wins, which is a very low number, are going to be pretty happy.
Okay. Well, Scott, I really appreciate you coming on and making your debut here on Locked On Falcons. Looking forward to re-upping with you a little bit later in the season to see if the team is starting to answer some of those questions and live up to these expectations. But let the people know what you have on deck for them over at AtlantaFalcons.com this season.
Oh my gosh, there are so many things. But I think most importantly, we have our Falcons Final Whistle podcast, which is a post-game podcast that myself and Tori McElhaney and our new features writer, Ashton Edmonds, is going to be a part of. We have a brand new pod. The first episode is being recorded tomorrow. The special guest is Grady Jarrett, and it's going to be a player and coach focused podcast called Under the Branch. And we are pretty excited to get that one going. If you guys enjoyed Tori McElhaney's podcast with Dean Pease, it's going to be something like that. And we're really going to kind of get to know the players and the personalities within this franchise.
Absolutely. And not a better place to start than with Grady Jarrett there. Scott, again, really appreciate you joining me. We'll be talking a little bit later with someone who, Scott, kind of mentioned, getting into it with Arthur Smith on Monday with Jeff Schultz of The Athletic. And we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But again, Scott, really appreciate you joining me on today's episode.
Thank you. And love the show. And I'm a big Jeff Schultz fan. So this is going to be a good episode coming out.
So, guys, as I said, we got Jeff Schultz of The Athletic coming up later into today's episode to talk about his expectations for the season, talk a little bit more about, Desmond Ridder and whether or not a successful season for the Falcons is finding out if Desmond Ridder is the guy or Marcus Mariota is the guy, as Scott indicated. But before we get into that conversation with Jeff Schultz, I do want to plug Brightco, the jewelry insurance. We know that the internet is a place for epic fails, and whether you're at a gender reveal gone wrong or a public proposal that doesn't go your way because that special someone said no in front of 20,000 people, or you're trying to be romantic, taking her out on a boat, and rather than the ring winding up on her finger, it winds up in the water. You don't want to be that guy. You certainly don't want to see your failure splattered all over the internet and going viral for all the wrong reasons. And while there's no insurance for that special someone saying no to you, there is protection to keep that ring from winding up in the wrong place. And the people at Brightco Jewelry Insurance will make sure you get the replacement for the full value of your ring, no matter if it's lost, it's stolen, or you just can't figure out what happened to it. All you got to do is go to bright.co/locked on. That's BRITE.co/locked on. And it's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover your butt with the best jewelry insurance in the business. All right, y'all, you are back for Locked On Falcons with another illustrious guest. He is none other than Jeff Schultz, a frequent guest here on Locked On Falcons, usually talking about, some goings on. I thought we would have Jeff on talk about what's going on with Deion Jones at some point this summer. And we still don't quite know what's going on with Deion Jones, but maybe Jeff can share some insight into that, or Jeff can talk to us about what he expects for the Falcons this upcoming season. And I'm surprised, Jeff, a little to see you in one piece after the chewing out you got from Arthur Smith yesterday in the press conference.
And I've been called a lot of things in my career, but that was a Russian bot or a bot was the first. That was the first for me. It was fun. I still think the question was a fair question. And I mean, everybody knows at some point Falcons are going to have to look at Desmond Ridder to see what they have in him. That's why they drafted him in the third round. And I simply was asking a question to the head coach, who has an offensive background and a background working with quarterbacks, saying, how long do you think you need to accurately evaluate him? How many games do you need to see him in? And I understand why he doesn't want to talk about it, because if he says, I need to see him start 5 games, if he wants to get that specific, then suddenly you're at week 9 and Marcus Mariota has started every game. Everyone's going to start saying, well, you said he has to start 5. I totally get that. But I mean, there are ways to answer that question without being specific. He didn't do that. Instead, he kind of went on a little bit of a humorous attack, which was fine. And look, for anybody who wasn't there and doesn't know the relationship between Arthur and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll just say this. There are a lot of things that happen in press conferences that don't happen after the press conference. And I'll use yesterday as an example. He and I spoke 2 or 3 times probably after the press conference yesterday. And we were like laughing and joking about it and other things also. The only thing we actually had a semi-serious conversation about was something completely not related to this. And I don't even want to go into it. It doesn't really matter for your listeners. But Arthur and I have a very good relationship. We have since he got here. And, you know, I have to ask the questions. He's going to say what he feels like he needs to say to protect himself and protect his team. And that's fine. And frankly, it made my column a lot easier just because of the back and forth. But that's all that was all about. And I think, by the way, and I think you've even had a podcast on this, I think it's the right decision to not play Desmond Ridder right now. It would be silly to throw him in there in the current situation when you really don't know what you have right now on the team. There's a likelihood of some chaos early on. And if you're going to have that chaos, then why would you start him right now? And I totally get that. So I'm on board actually with that decision.
Yep. I got a kick out of it, Jeff. So you entertained at least one person with that column in that exchange. So, well, you know, talking about, you know, Desmond Ridder and sort of, you know, I think that's been a question since the draft of, you know, finding out whether or not Desmond Ridder is the guy, or, you know, some people think, you know, Marcus Mariota has a chance to be the guy to replace Matt Ryan. But I guess before we sort of talk specifically about that subject, you know, Jeff, what are your sort of expectations for this upcoming season for this Falcons team? You talked about, you know, things being a little chaotic early on in the season. Do you think things, you know, may mellow out as the season progresses?
Well, I went down the roster yesterday and counted 28 players on the current 53-man roster. So we're not including practice squad guys. We're not including injured reserve guys. We're not including guys who were on the practice squad last year who might still be here. The current 53-man roster, there's 28 new players. All right. That's a lot of new players. And so for anyone to assume they think they know this team, they're just wrong. And it's going to take time to come together, particularly in the, let's say, the subsections of the team, right? The unit, the individual units, offensive line working together, defensive line, front seven working together, the receiver group working together. I'm actually not that concerned about the secondary. I happen to think the secondary might be pretty solid, but we'll see. And I don't know how long they're going to be able to hold coverage. But that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's going to take a while to figure out exactly what they have. In terms of expectations, Aaron, they have a hard schedule. I mean, it's a pretty difficult schedule, relatively speaking. And I kind of we all do this every year, right? You know, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. So I went down and I wrote immediately what I thought were losses. Okay. And I gave them season splits with the Saints and the Panthers because I don't really have a feel for those two teams right now too. So I figured I'm going to play it safe, give them a split with both. I gave them 2 losses against the Bucs. And so basically right away, that brought me to 2-9. And then there's 6 other games, I think if I had it right, 6 other games of basically games that I can consider winnable games. And they range everywhere from the early season Browns and the Bears to the Steelers at home. And so if you split those 6 games, now you're at 5 wins. If you have a much better season than people think and you actually sweep all 6 of those games, now you're 8-9. So I'm inclined to think somewhere in the 5 to 7 win range, maybe 7 would be at the high end. I think they're going to play really hard. I think they really like Arthur Smith and they're going to play hard for him. I just don't know how good they are in personnel. And it's just one of those situations where I just think other teams are going to have better players, honestly.
Yeah, I'm of a like mind there, not only from a record standpoint, but from those sort of expectations on a scrappy sort of competitive team, but just may not have quite the firepower you need to beat some of these tougher teams on their schedule. So as you put it, I think, yeah, there will certainly be a number of winnable games, and we'll see if they get the breaks that they kind of need to win the majority of those games to get one of those better records this season. And whether it's based off of win total, whether it's based off of Desmond Ridder sort of emerging as a viable option, long-term option for the Falcons as a starting quarterback, if we're fast forwarding 5 months from now, what would you sort of say would determine a successful 2022 for this Atlanta Falcons team?
Most people, when making that determination, look at wins and losses. I'm going to really try hard not to do that for things that we already talked about. I think it's possible to get better and still lose games. I know people have used the analogy of the Atlanta Hawks before, when they first got that young core group together, and they were really kind of fun to watch, but they were still losing games. But you could sort of see something good was happening. And I could see potentially that would happen with this team. So I guess what I would look for, Aaron, would be like their draft picks from the first 2 drafts. Did they make the right decision drafting Kyle Pitts 4th overall, or should they have drafted a quarterback, or should they have traded down and drafted somebody else and accumulated a pick? Did they make the right decision drafting Drake London? Was he worth the 8th pick overall, or should they have gone to another position or traded down? Or was it the right decision to draft a wide receiver, even though we were all in agreement they needed wide receivers? As I referenced, how does the offensive line come together? Because if, let's say, Drew Dalman isn't the answer at center, and we know how important the middle of the line is, and their guard situation kind of remains shaky, actually maybe everybody except for potentially everybody except for Lindstrom and I guess and Matthews, we're not really sure about 100%. Then they have an issue on the offensive line. So I think I would look for, and how does the receiver group come together? How bad is it? So the way I would measure, and this is kind of vague, I understand, is I would measure individual units or individual areas on the team, and specifically, were they wise in their 2 drafts? Because I really like the coaching staff, and I understand there's a lot to be proven, but right now the biggest issue with this roster is personnel, and once they get out of cap hell into next offseason, they have an opportunity to spend some money, not to get some billion-dollar free agent, but to actually get some higher quality players to fill holes. But that's not going to help you if this base from the first 2 drafts isn't down, and basically the decisions weren't correct.
So it sounds like you are saying something I've sort of said in the past, which is this season's kind of about checking boxes. Like, how many boxes can you check from a personnel standpoint? How many of these young pieces can you look at and say, hey, we have something here that we can build a solid foundation on for the future? And the more boxes they check, the more successful a year that they have. Is that fair?
Totally. And look, they have, I know Josh Kendall wrote about this recently. I don't know what the number is, but they have an inordinate number of players in 1-year contracts this year. And when you do that, you're getting players basically, the players are trying to prove themselves, and some of them are coming here just to try to prove themselves here so they can go somewhere else and make more money. And then you have some players like Cordero Patterson who do something that really nobody saw coming, and suddenly he likes it here and he wants to stay here. So there are a lot of prove it kind of players on the roster. And again, and I think you would throw draft picks into that too. And I think the more of those you hit on, or to use your term, check boxes, the least amount of fixing you have moving forward. Because again, next year you can start spending more money. You don't have to maybe get as many low-level street free agents. And I really don't mean to criticize the guys they're signing. Let's be real, they're shopping in different stores than everybody else, right? and so you can shop in a better store when you have more money to spend, because they have really spent everyone talks about the dead cap money. The flip side of that is if you look at actual salaries they are paying players this year, they are one of the lowest teams because they had the least amount of money to spend. If you want to look at it that way. Well, if you're buying the cheapest players, logic would suggest you're going to get some bargains, but you're also going to get some players who are low paid for a reason.
Yep. I think that's fair. So, Jeff, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts on this upcoming Falcons season. Let the people know what you have in store over at The Athletic this week, this month, and this year.
Well, let me lay out my budget for the next 12 months. Now, this week I will be, of course, covering the opener against the Saints. And every Thursday morning during the football season, Weekend Predictions drops. It started last week, and I have a Falcons column up now on the topic we discussed earlier with Desmond Ritter. And I'll be bouncing around all sports as usual: Falcons, Georgia, Braves, and anything else that fits in between there.
Okay. I could say something snarky about the Falcons in relation to teams like Georgia and the Braves, but I will let that go to people's imagination.
You snarky? Wait a minute.
Yeah. I know it's crazy that I could be snarky. But Jeff, really, again, I really appreciate you joining us. I look forward to future conversations, and I make this promise every single year. Hope to get you on after a win because it's been so rare these last couple of years, but
okay.
I won't make that promise because who knows how many wins the Falcons will get.
All right. I'll try to text you within 5 minutes after every win, just as a reminder.
Okay. All right. I look forward to those texts, my friend. Jeff, really appreciate you coming on. And of course, folks, we have more to come on today's Locked On Falcons episode. Appreciate it. Till then. So like I said, guys, there's more to come here on Locked On Falcons, including discussion of Drew Dalman's ascendancy to the starting lineup at the center position and what that means for the team coming up, guys. But first I want to tell you about Prize Picks, a new fun way to play daily fantasy. All you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players and see if they will score more or less than their Prize Picks projection. My picks for week 1 are already in. I have Kyle Pitts having more than 55.5 receiving yards. I got Marcus Mariota having more than 210.5 passing yards this week against the Saints. And the thing I like about Prize Picks is I'm not worried about what other people are picking. It's just me versus the projections. And they offer not only projections on the NFL, of course, NBA, NHL, MLB, PGA, college football, and so much more. Prize Picks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the US and Canada. And all you have to do to enter is download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com and sign up to play daily fantasy. And first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will match it with another $100. So all you have to do is enter that promo code Locked On, LOCKEDON, at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. So, guys, I want to thank you again for rating and reviewing Locked On Falcons on your preferred podcast app like Apple's and iTunes, and give us that 5-star review. And make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel if you haven't already. Hit that bell, give us a like, so that that will help us out as well. So just want to give you guys an update to the news. As you know, the last couple of days of episodes have been Q&As and season previews and whatnot, and so certain things have happened. The Falcons did pick up to finalize their practice squad with the 16th member of that by signing ex-Bears nose tackle Khyiris Tonga, sort of a wide body run stuffing player that gives the team a little bit more depth behind Anthony Rush this season, in addition to Abdullah Anderson. So another wide body to sort of beef up that run defense. And we'll sort of see if the Falcons can develop Tonga, here in Atlanta, where he did not develop in Chicago. Of course, no surprise that Ryan Pace is exerting his influence on the team's practice squad as we continue this season. So we'll see if we get an opportunity to see Tonga later this season to sort of beef up that group. And the other sort of news that kind of came out of Jeff's fun exchange on Monday with Arthur Smith, one of those fun exchanges, not specifically with Jeff, but with our good friend D-Led, about who's going to be the starting center. And that was announced on that Monday press conference that would be announced when the depth chart would be dropped, which came out on Tuesday, and it did drop. And we found out it is official that Drew Dalman, at least according to the depth chart, maybe Arthur Smith decides to throw us a curveball come Sunday, but Drew Dalman is listed atop the depth chart at the starting center position. So he won that competition. And I think if you've been listening to Locked On Falcons over the last several weeks and months, that's not a huge surprise. Obviously, we can sort of trace back through the clarity of hindsight some of the signs that indicated that the team was moving in this direction to replace Matt Hennessy with Drew Dalman. They've been in a competition all summer, rotating days, platooning with the ones all summer long. But it goes back to that 2-game sample where we saw them sort of splitting reps between Hennessy and Dalman, despite the fact that at that time, I think most people looked at Hennessy as one of the better of the team's 3 question marks starting offensive linemen. We were firmly on McGarry Island, and it seems like Arthur Smith is also a resident of that island because, Caleb McGarry job status has not been upended over time. But one of the things that emerged when I rewatched the offensive line at the end of this past season was, Drew Dalman getting some early opportunities in the season and looking pretty promising, particularly with his run blocking against the Eagles, and look, playing that guard position and, being able to hold his own against that Eagles front at least as a run blocker at the guard position, was indicative that, hey, if this guy plays the center position, maybe he can bring a little bit more physicality. I think we saw that in those opportunities in the preseason, just a little bit more physical. Dalman fitting that identity that you want, a more physical style, and sort of the indication also that Dalman was kind of the front runner there, getting the reps with the ones on day 1 of training camp. And so, we'll see if Dalman can sort of lead the team to having that more physical style. And obviously, I do not expect Dalman to magically solve the Falcons' problems. This is something we talked about leading into the summer where, Dalman is basically checking all the same boxes that Hennessy was checking a year ago as this sort of unproven second-year player that's a bit undersized, and you wonder if he can hold up, particularly when he faces the Vita Veas of the world this season. But I do think we'll probably see some ups and downs with Dalman like we saw with Hennessy a year ago, but hopefully he can sort of embody that physical identity that people like Scott and Jeff and myself, and I'm sure many of you guys are hoping to see this team embody in the trenches. And obviously, if Dalman does not necessarily live up to that, then the Falcons still have a insurance policy in Matt Hennessy in their back pocket. So we're going to get 2 changes along the offensive line. McGarry Island still going strong. That tsunami hasn't quite hit it, although we'll see, if there's a mid-season change at that right tackle, given the murderer's row of left defensive ends and edge rushers that, McGarry will see early in the season, like Cam Jordan, Leonard Floyd, Jadeveon Clowney, Shaq Barrett, Nick Bosa, etc. So if he can survive that, then he will certainly earn, his acclaim, and that tsunami, several tsunamis is basically going to hit McGarry Island. So we'll see if the island's infrastructure can hold up there. But we'll see also what Drew Dalman can do at the center position, Elijah Wilkinson, the new starting left guard as well. So those are things to keep an eye on. And, a lot of question marks along this offensive line. And we'll see if these guys can sort of answer and check some of those boxes and say, hey, instead of having 3 question marks at the offensive line, like we had at the end of last year, do we have 2? And, I do think the center position is one of those positions that is most likely of this 3 to hopefully check that box with Dalman and his upside there. So we'll see what that does, guys. And, tomorrow's episode, we'll be joined by Ross Jackson of the Locked On Saints, preview on a crossover Thursday, this week 1 matchup. And we'll get into the nitty gritty of sort of how Dalman and the rest of these guys match up against a formidable Saints front and elsewhere on the Saints team. And, guys, speaking of Locked On Saints, you can probably catch me, I believe, if I got the schedule and timing right, on the Ultimate Pro Football Preview with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints, as well as Julian Council of Locked On Panthers and David Harrison of Locked On Bucks. As that's an 8 episode extravaganza going division by division, starting last week and continuing this week all the way up to Sunday. And I believe the NFC South preview is airing on Wednesday. So as many of you guys listen to it, so check that out as your second listen, in addition to Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, all that stuff. So Ultimate Football Preview is available on Odyssey, on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Just search for the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, and you will be able to find it on your preferred podcast app. And that, if you haven't checked it out yet, obviously the NFC South preview is a great day to start, and you can then binge the rest of the episodes, get the insight from all the local experts like myself and Ross, as well as Odyssey NFL insiders, and get those betting tips from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets as your second listen. So guys, that will do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Really appreciate you. Look forward to crossover Thursday tomorrow with Ross, and then we'll be joined later in the week by Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta to get you guys that final week 1 preview. But football is almost upon us, right? We're this close. So looking forward to that. Really appreciate it, guys. Until then.